The ocean boiled first. That was what the last satellite footage showed before New Busan went dark. A beam of golden-violet light, thick as a river, punched down from the sky and touched the water near the capital city. The ocean did not explode. It simply stopped being water. It became steam, then plasma, then nothing. 7 million people lived on New Busan. The beam lasted 11 minutes. When it stopped, there was no one left to count the dead. Admiral Taeho stood in the command room of the station Chonmasan, high above Earth's orbit, and watched the footage play for the third time. He did not blink. He did not sit down. He stood with his hands behind his back, and his face looked like it was carved from gray stone. Around him, officers worked at their stations in near silence. Some of them had family on New Busan. Some of them were crying quietly at their desks. Taeho let them cry. There would be time for orders later. Right now, grief was the only honest response. The footage ended. The screen went black. "Play it again," Taeho said. His aide, a young woman named Sujin, hesitated. "Sir, we have the full damage report ready." I said, "Play it again." She played it again. Taeho watched the ocean boil for the fourth time. He was not torturing himself. He was studying. The beam came from the Chiron Expanse, a star system over 400 light-years away. 400 light-years, and it still had enough power to erase a planet's surface in minutes. Taeho needed to understand what they were dealing with. He needed to burn the image into his mind so deeply that it would never let him consider surrender. The briefing came 2 hours later. The War Council gathered around a long table. Fleet commanders, intelligence officers, scientists, and one woman who sat at the far end, with dark circles under her eyes and bandages around her wrists where medical tubes had recently been removed. Her name was Hana, and she was the reason any of them understood what was happening at all. 6 months ago, before the war, before New Busan, the United Earth Navy had sent a diplomatic team into the Chiron Expanse to make contact with the Veil Communion, a coalition of 14 alien species that controlled a large portion of the galaxy. The mission was supposed to be peaceful. It was not. Hana had been the team's language specialist. She was the one who was supposed to talk to them. Instead, something talked to her. "Play the recording," Taeho said. The room's speakers crackled, and then Hana's voice filled the space. It was a recording from 6 months ago, shaking, barely holding together. She was describing what happened when the diplomatic ship entered the star system. It was inside the star, the recorded Hana said, living inside it. We couldn't see it at first. Then it reached out. Not with a signal, not with a transmission. It reached into our minds, directly. Like someone opening a door inside your skull that you didn't know was there. The recording paused. There was the sound of someone vomiting in the background. Then Hana's voice continued. Most of the crew went down immediately, unconscious, bleeding from their ears. I held on. I don't know why. Maybe because I was trained in language, and it was trying to communicate. It pushed a message into my brain. Not words, more like a feeling that had structure. But if I had to translate it into words, it would be this. Worship is not optional. Worship is physics. The recording ended. The real Hana, sitting at the table, stared at her hands. She had not fully recovered from that encounter. The doctors said she might never fully recover. Taeho looked at her. What is it? Hana raised her eyes. It calls itself the Radiance. The communion species worship it as a god. It lives in the plasma of the star. It thinks in electromagnetic wavelengths. It's old, older than our entire solar system, and it believes with total certainty that every living thing in the galaxy exists to serve it. And the communion? Taeho asked. Sujin answered this one. She had spent months gathering intelligence, intercepting alien communications, piecing together the history of the communion. She stood and activated a display showing 14 different alien species, their worlds, their fleets, their histories. "They're not willing allies," Sujin said. "Every single one of them was given the same choice we were given, kneel or burn." The first species to resist was called the Morin. The radiance boiled their home world. All 4 billion of them, gone in a single day. After that, the others fell in line. They've been feeding it ever since. Every species in the communion harvests energy from their own stars and sends it to the Chiron expanse as tribute. They've been doing this for thousands of years. The room was silent. "So it's not a god," one of the fleet commanders said. "It's a parasite." "It's both," Hana said quietly. "It genuinely believes it's divine, and it has the power to make that belief real. If you can burn a world from 400 light-years away, the difference between a god and a parasite is just a matter of opinion." Taeho let the silence sit for a moment. Then he asked the question that everyone in the room was thinking, but no one wanted to say out loud. "How do we kill it?" No one answered. The fleet commanders looked at each other. The scientists shifted in their seats. Hana stared at the table. The radiance was a being made of pure energy, living inside a star. It was older than human civilization by a factor of 1,000. It commanded the weapons of 14 species. It could reach across hundreds of light-years and erase cities. How do you fight that? How do you even begin? Taeho's communicator buzzed softly. A message encrypted at the highest level, from a research facility hidden in the asteroid belt. He opened it. The message was from a physicist named Yuna, someone Taeho had personally assigned to the most classified project in human history 3 months ago. The message was short. "I think I know how, but you won't like what it costs." Taeho read it twice. Then he pulled up the casualty list from New Busan on his personal screen. 7 million names. Each name was a person. Someone who had woken up that morning expecting an ordinary day, and instead met the fire of a thing that called itself a god. He reached the bottom of the list. Then he typed his reply to Yuna. "Tell me everything." He sent the message and closed his screen. Around him, the command room hummed with quiet activity, the steady sound of a species preparing for a war it did not yet know how to win. Taeho stood at the center of it, still as a stone, and stared at the dark place on the star map, where the Chiron expanse burned with stolen light. Somewhere in that light, something ancient and terrible was waiting. It had given humanity a simple command: kneel. Taeho had no intention of kneeling. The asteroid had no name. It was just a number in a catalog. A dark, ugly rock, tumbling slowly through the belt between Mars and Jupiter. The United Earth Navy had hollowed it out in secret, turning its insides into the largest weapons laboratory ever built by human hands. From the outside, it looked like nothing. From the inside, it looked like madness. Yuna met Taeho at the airlock. She was thinner than the last time he had seen her, and her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She had the look of someone who had not slept properly in weeks, not from laziness, but from the kind of obsession that grabs hold of a scientist's brain and refuses to let go. She shook Taeho's hand and led him inside without small talk. There was no time for small talk. 3 more colony worlds had fallen since New Busan. Earth itself was now within the Radiance's estimated strike range. "How much do you know about stellar physics?" Yuna asked, as they walked through a long corridor cut from raw stone. "Assume I know nothing," Taeho said. "Good. That makes this easier." Yuna stopped at a heavy door and pressed her hand to the scanner. The door opened, revealing a massive cavern lit by harsh white lights. In the center of the cavern, engineers in heavy suits crawled over something that Taeho's brain struggled to understand at first. It was a rod, a simple, dark metal rod, but it was enormous, so long that the far end disappeared into the shadows of the cavern. Support structures held it in place like the skeleton of some impossible bridge. That, Yuna said, is 10 kilometers of solid tungsten. Taeho stared at it. 10 kilometers. He had commanded warships that were shorter than this thing. We call it Project Sindunha, Yuna continued. The execution is not. She led him to a control room overlooking the cavern and pulled up a display. The radiance is an electromagnetic consciousness. It lives in the plasma currents of the Chiron star. It uses the star's energy the way we use our nervous system, to think, to act, to reach out across space and burn things. But it's bound to that star. It can't leave. It can't exist without the plasma dynamics that support its consciousness. So, we destroy the star, Taeho said. We can't destroy a star, not with anything we have, but we can hurt it. Yuna zoomed the display into a model of the Chiron star. If we detonate antimatter charges at specific points on the star's surface, simultaneously, precisely, we can create a cascading instability in the plasma flows. Think of it like disrupting the blood flow in a brain. The radiance won't die from that, but it will be stunned. For approximately 90 seconds, its coherence will break apart. 90 seconds, Taeho repeated. 90 seconds. And in that window, we fire this. She pointed at the tungsten rod below them. We accelerate it through a chain of 26 magnetic accelerator platforms, each one the size of a frigate. Each platform fires once and burns out. By the time the rod reaches the end of the chain, it's moving at 12% the speed of light. Taeho did the math in his head. A 10-kilometer tungsten rod at 12% light speed. The kinetic energy alone would be nearly beyond calculation. We fire it into the star's core, Yuna said. The radiance is destabilized, its structure is broken, and then 36 million tons of tungsten hit it at 36,000 kilometers per second. The energy release will crack the star's core, and everything living inside that core will come apart. Taeho looked down at the great dark rod resting in its cradle, and then back at Yuna. Will it work? The simulations say there's a 31% chance of total success. And the other 69%? We miss the window. The star absorbs the impact. The radiance survives and knows exactly what we tried to do. And then it burns Earth. Taeho nodded slowly. In the cavern below, engineers moved along the length of the rod like ants on a fallen tree. He could hear the distant clang of tools, the hiss of welding torches, the hum of heavy machinery. An entire civilization's last hope, shaped from metal and desperation. A man appeared at the control room door. He was broad-shouldered, with grease on his hands and a tired smile on his face. His name was Do-hyun, and he was the chief engineer responsible for building the thing that was supposed to kill a god. Admiral, Do-hyun said, wiping his hands on a rag. Want the bad news or the worse news? Start with the bad. Building the 26 accelerator platforms has eaten 40% of our remaining war-grade materials. If this doesn't work, we won't have enough left to build a proper defense fleet. And the worst news? The tungsten rod has to survive passage through the star's outer layers before reaching the core. We're coating it with a blade of shielding, but the tolerances are razor thin. If the shielding is off by even a fraction of a percent, the rod burns up before it hits anything important. Can you make it work? Taeho asked. Do-hyun looked at him for a long moment. I've been building things my whole life, Admiral. I built my first engine when I was 14, from parts I found in a scrapyard. I've never built anything I couldn't make work. He paused. But I've also never tried to kill a god before. So I suppose we'll find out. Almost. Later that night, Taeho found Yuna alone in her lab. She was sitting in front of a screen, showing the radiance's energy signature, a beautiful, complex pattern of light that pulsed and shifted like something alive. Because it was alive. Can I ask you something? Taeho said. Yuna didn't turn around. You want to know if it's really alive? Yes. It's more alive than we are, Yuna said quietly. It thinks in wavelengths we can't see. It has memories encoded in magnetic field patterns that are older than our sun. It has experienced things we can't even imagine. By any meaningful definition, it is one of the most remarkable living things in the universe. Taeho stood beside her and looked at the screen. The light pattern was beautiful, genuinely beautiful, like watching a sunset that could think. "Does that change anything?" he asked. Yuna finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were steady. "It burned 7 million people on New Busan. It's burned billions more across the galaxy. It gave us a choice between slavery and extinction." She paused. "Does it matter how beautiful the thing is that's trying to kill you?" Taeho held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once and left. The next morning, Captain Jiho of the destroyer Iron Vow arrived at the asteroid facility with his crew. He was young for a captain, barely 35, with a sharp face and calm eyes that made him look older than he was. Taeho briefed him personally. The Iron Vow would lead the escort squadron that protected the tungsten rod during its final approach to the Chiron expanse. "You understand what escort means in this context," Taeho said. "It means we put ourselves between the rod and anything that tries to stop it. The Communion will throw everything they have at you. I know. The survival probability for the escort squadron is very low." Jiho met his eyes without flinching. "My crew and I have already discussed it. We volunteer." On the bridge of the Iron Vow, a young officer named Wanjin sat at his station and typed a letter to his mother. He told her about the food in the mess hall, about the stars outside the viewport, about how the captain had told them all what the mission was and asked if anyone wanted to transfer out. Nobody had. Wanjin didn't tell his mother that part. He saved the letter and closed the file without sending it. In the construction cavern, the tungsten spear waited. 10 kilometers of cold, dark metal, built to cross the distance between defiance and divinity. Do-hyun stood on the observation platform above it, running final calculations on his tablet. The numbers were brutal. The margins were paper-thin. Everything had to go exactly right, and in war, nothing ever went exactly right. He stared at the spear for a long time. "We built a god-killer," he said to no one. "Heaven help us if it doesn't work." 61 ships slipped out of the solar system in the dead of night, running dark. No active sensors, no radio transmissions, no navigational beacons. They moved like ghosts through the black space between stars, their engines throttled down to the absolute minimum needed to maintain course. Inside the ships, the lights were dimmed to save power. The corridors were cold. The crews spoke in whispers, as if the enemy might somehow hear them across the vastness of space. At the center of the formation, hidden behind layers of escort ships like a secret wrapped in armor, the tungsten spear drifted on its transport cradle. 10 kilometers of dark metal, cold and silent, aimed at the heart of a god. Around it, the 26 accelerator platforms floated in precise formation, each one locked into its calculated position in the firing chain. One shot. That was all they would get. Admiral Taeho commanded the fleet from the carrier Baekdu, the largest ship in the formation. He spent most of his time in the command center, studying star maps and running through contingency plans he knew would be useless if things went wrong. The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in detail. Approach the Chiron expanse without being detected, deploy the stellar disruption drones, destabilize the radiance, fire the spear. 90 seconds to save the human race. 3 weeks. That was how long the approach would take through hostile space. 3 weeks of silence and darkness and waiting. On the 7th day, Hana started bleeding. She was sitting in her quarters aboard the Baekdu, reading through old communion transmissions that Sujin's intelligence team had decoded when she felt the pressure. It started behind her eyes, a dull, heavy sensation, like someone pressing their thumbs into her skull from the inside. Then it moved down to her sinuses, her ears, the back of her throat. She touched her upper lip, and her fingers came away red. She had felt this before, during first contact, when the radiance had reached into her mind. That same pressure, that same terrible sense of something vast turning its attention in her direction. She went to Tejo immediately. "It doesn't know we're here," she said, pressing a cloth to her nose. "Not yet, but it senses something, a disturbance, like an animal that smells smoke but can't see the fire." Tejo studied her face. "How sure are you?" "If it knew, we would already be dead. The beam that hit New Busan, it can fire that at will. We're still alive, which means it's not looking at us. It's just restless. Can it find us? I don't know. Maybe. If we get closer, the pressure will get stronger. On me specifically. I'm like a wound it left in my mind. If it focuses, it might be able to trace that wound back to its source." "Then maybe you shouldn't be on this ship," Tejo said. Hana shook her head. "I'm the only early warning system you have, Admiral. If the radiance locks onto the fleet, I'll know before your sensors do. You need me here. The headaches and the blood are the price." Tejo did not argue. He could see in her eyes that she had made her decision long before this conversation, and nothing he said would change it. He simply nodded and told the medical team to stay close to her. The days crept by. Inside the Iron Vow, the crew lived in a state of quiet tension that never fully went away. They ate their meals in near silence. They checked their weapons and their stations over and over again. They slept in short broken stretches, waking at every small sound, every vibration in the hull. Captain Jiho walked the ship twice a day. He visited every section, spoke to every crew member, checked every system. He did it not because he expected to find problems. His crew was excellent. But because he knew that in the long dark hours of waiting, the thing that killed morale fastest was the feeling of being alone. He made sure no one on his ship felt alone. One evening, he found Wanjin sitting alone in the mess hall, staring at a cup of cold tea. The young officer looked up when Jiho sat down across from him. "Can't sleep?" Jiho asked. "No, sir." "Me neither." Jiho poured himself a cup from the pot on the table. It was cold, but he drank it anyway. "You know, my grandfather was a fisherman. Small boat off the south coast. He used to take me out before sunrise when I was a boy. I hated it. The water was always cold, and the boat smelled terrible." Wanjin smiled a little. "Did you catch anything?" "Sometimes. My grandfather didn't really care about the fish, though. He used to say that the sea doesn't hate you when it drowns you. It doesn't even notice. It's just big, and you're small, and if you don't respect that, you die." Jiho turned his cup slowly in his hands. "That's what the radiance is. An ocean that learned to think. It doesn't hate us. We're too small for it to hate. It simply expects us to drown. And we're not going to," Wanjin said. "No," Jiho said, "we're gonna drain the ocean." He finished his tea and stood up. "Get some sleep, Wanjin. Tomorrow, we start combat drills." In her lab aboard the Baekdu, Yuna ran the final simulations for the 100th time. The numbers had not changed. 31% chance of total success. She stared at the probability readout and thought about what those numbers really meant. 31% was not good. In any normal military operation, 31% would be grounds for cancellation. But this was not a normal military operation. This was the only option they had. She did not tell anyone outside the command staff about the number. The crews didn't need to know. They were already doing the bravest thing she had ever seen, flying straight toward an alien god on nothing but trust and stubbornness. Telling them the math said they would probably fail would serve no purpose at all. Sujin brought worse news on the 14th day. She had been intercepting Communion Fleet communications throughout the approach, piecing together the enemy's movements from fragments of coded signals. She laid out her findings for Tejo in the command center, her face grim. "They're mobilizing more ships than we expected," she said. "A lot more. Our original estimates put the defensive fleet at the Chiron Expanse at about 70 ships. Current intercepts suggest it's closer to 300. The room went cold. Someone warned them, Tejo said. Not necessarily. The radiance may have warned itself. Hana said it's restless. If it communicated that unease to the communion, they would reinforce as a precaution. They don't know we're coming, but they know something is wrong. 300 ships, Tejo said quietly, against our 61. Yes, sir. Tejo looked at the star map. The Chiron Expanse was a glowing point of violet gold light at the edge of the display, getting closer every day. 300 ships, 4-to-1 odds, at minimum. Most of the communion vessels were larger and better armed than anything in the human fleet. The numbers were not in their favor. The numbers had never been in their favor. He opened a secure channel to all ships. He had thought about giving a speech, something grand, something historical, something that officers would quote in textbooks 100 years from now. But when he opened his mouth, the grand words didn't come. He was tired, and his people were tired, and they deserved honesty more than poetry. They told us to kneel, he said. We built a spear instead. I'll see you on the other side. He closed the channel. The fleet flew on in silence. On the 18th day, the Chiron Expanse appeared on long-range sensors. It didn't look like a normal star. It glowed an unnatural violet gold, pulsing slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Even through the cold data of the sensor displays, the crew could feel it. A heaviness in the chest, a prickling at the back of the neck, a sense of something impossibly large and impossibly aware turning slowly in the dark. Hana stood on the bridge of the Baekdu, blood crusted under her nose, her hands trembling at her sides. She stared at the sensor display and felt the radiance pushing against the walls of her mind like a tide pressing against a dam. It's waking up, she whispered. The fleet sailed on toward the light. They came out of the dark, like a swarm of burning insects. 300 communion warships pouring from their defensive positions around the violet star in a wave of light and fury. Their hulls glowed with channeled energy drawn directly from the radiance itself. Their weapons pulsed with the same golden-violet fire that had boiled the oceans of New Busan. They came screaming over every communication frequency, broadcasting a single word in every known language, over and over and over. Blasphemers! 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 Admiral Tejo stood in the command center of the Baekdu and watched the enemy fleet spread across his tactical display like a stain. 300 warships against 61. He had known the numbers, he had accepted the numbers, but seeing them laid out in glowing points of hostile red on the screen still put a cold weight in his stomach that no amount of preparation could remove. All ships, combat formation, he said. His voice was steady. Escort squadron, hold position around the spear. Main fleet, engage and draw fire. Our only objective is to buy time. The human fleet split. 42 ships surged forward to meet the communion wave head-on. 19 ships, the escort squadron, led by the Iron Vow, stayed behind, forming a tight protective ring around the tungsten spear and its chain of accelerator platforms. The first exchange of fire was brutal. Communion energy lances cut through the leading human destroyers like hot wire through cloth. The destroyer Hala broke apart in a flash of white light. The cruiser Jindo took a direct hit to its engine section and spun away, burning. The frigate Namhae simply vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of glowing debris. Tejo watched the ship markers disappear from his display. Each one was a name. Each name was a crew. There would be time for grief later, if there was a later. Deploy the disruption drones, he ordered. From the belly of the Baekdu, 40 small drones launched in rapid sequence. each one carrying an antimatter charge precisely calibrated by Yuna's team. Their target was the surface of the Chiron star itself. They needed to reach specific coordinates on the star's surface and detonate simultaneously to create the cascading plasma instability that would stun the radiates. They needed at least 26 drones to reach their positions. If even one less made it, the disruption pattern would fail. The drones screamed toward the star. The Communion saw them immediately. In the engineering bay of the Baekdu, Do-hyun sat at his monitoring station and watched the drone count on his screen. 40 drones, each one a blinking green dot, racing toward the star. The Communion point defense systems opened fire. Green dots began to wink out. 38, 35, 32. Do-hyun gripped the edge of his console. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, come on." 29, 28, 27. The Communion was targeting them with everything they had. Entire warships were breaking away from the main battle to chase down individual drones. The human fleet pressed harder, trying to draw fire away from the drones, and ships were dying for it. The cruiser Baekho rammed a Communion destroyer that was lining up a shot on the drone formation. Both ships exploded together. 26. The number hung on Do-hyun's screen. 26 drones remaining, still flying, still alive. Exactly the minimum needed. "That's the number," Do-hyun whispered. His hands were shaking. "Fire them. Fire them now." Yuna, standing beside him, gave the command. 26 antimatter charges detonated simultaneously on the surface of the Chiron star, each one at a precise mathematical coordinate, calculated to the millimeter. The explosions were tiny compared to the star, like pinpricks on the skin of a giant. But they were placed with surgical precision, targeting the exact plasma current junctions that supported the radiance's electromagnetic nervous system. The star shuddered. There was no other word for it. The star itself rippled, its surface distorting in ways that broke every model of stellar physics. The violet-gold glow flickered, sputtered, and then pulsed in a wild, chaotic pattern. And from the star came a sound that was not a sound, a vibration that passed through every ship, every hull, every body in the system. It was a scream that did not travel through air, but through electromagnetic radiation, through gravity waves, through the fabric of space itself. The radiance was in pain. On the bridge of the Baekdu, Hana collapsed to her knees. Blood poured from her nose, her ears, the corners of her eyes. She could feel it, the god thrashing, its consciousness splintering, its ancient mind cracking under the disruption like ice breaking on a frozen lake. It was confused. It was afraid. For the first time in 100,000 years, it did not understand what was happening to it. "Now!" Hana screamed through the blood. "Do it now. The window is open." Taeho gave the order. "Fire the spear." The first accelerator platform activated. A magnetic pulse of tremendous force gripped the 10-kilometer tungsten rod and hurled it forward. The rod crossed the distance to the second platform in a fraction of a second. The second platform fired, adding more velocity. Then the third, the fourth. Each platform burned out after its single firing, exploding behind the rod in a chain of short-lived stars. The rod accelerated faster and faster, a dark line of metal screaming through space at velocities that turned physics into poetry. They saw the god-killing spear racing toward their god, and they went mad. Ships broke formation entirely. Some fled. Some charged straight at the spear with no tactics, no formation, just pure desperate fury. A Communion battlecruiser, massive, nearly twice the size of any human vessel, swung onto an intercept course. If it reached the spear's trajectory, it could block the shot. One ship in the right place at the right time, and everything would fail. Captain Jiho saw it from the bridge of the Iron Vow. He did not hesitate. He did not call for orders. he did not pause to consider what he was about to do. He simply turned to his helmsman and said, "Set intercept course, full speed, ram it." The bridge crew looked at him. Wanjin at his station looked at him. Nobody spoke. Nobody argued. The helmsman set the course. The iron vows surged forward, engines at maximum, every alarm on the ship screaming. Jiho stood at the center of his bridge, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the view screen, where the communion battlecruiser grew larger with every passing second. Wanjin opened his personal files. He found the letter he had written to his mother weeks ago. In the quiet of the mess hall, he pressed send. The iron vow hit the communion battlecruiser at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. Both ships crumpled, merged, and then exploded in a ball of white fire that briefly outshone the wounded star behind them. Every soul on both ships was gone in an instant. The spear's path was clear. The 26th and final accelerator platform fired. The tungsten rod, now moving at 12% the speed of light, crossed the remaining distance to the star in seconds. It hit the star's outer layers and punched through them like a needle through paper, its ablative shielding burning away in a trail of superheated plasma. It reached the core. The impact shook the universe. The kinetic energy released was beyond anything humanity had ever created, beyond nuclear weapons, beyond antimatter, beyond the energy output of entire civilizations. The star's core cracked, and inside that crack, where the radiance had lived for 100,000 years, something vast and ancient and screaming came apart. It did not die slowly. It died in flashes, great arcs of electromagnetic fury lashing out in every direction, each one weaker than the last, each one more desperate. Its consciousness fragmented, scattered, dissolved. The thoughts of 100,000 years broke apart like a sandcastle in a rising tide. And then it was gone. The violet gold light of the Chiron star flickered once and went out, replaced by the ordinary yellow-white glow of a wounded but natural star. The communion ships stopped firing. Some of them simply went dark, drifting without power, their channeled energy source gone forever. Others began transmitting signals of surrender, confusion, panic. On the bridge of the Baekdu, Hana lay on the floor where she had fallen. The pressure in her mind was gone. The vast, crushing presence that had been pushing against her consciousness since the day of first contact had simply vanished, like a hand lifting from her chest. In its place was a silence so complete, so absolute, that it felt like a physical thing, a weight of nothing where something enormous had been. Tears ran down her face, cutting tracks through the dried blood. "It's gone," she whispered. "It's actually gone." Then she closed her eyes, and the world went dark. 19 ships came home. Out of 61 that had sailed into the dark, only 19 limped back to Earth's orbit, their hulls scarred and burned, their crews hollow-eyed and quiet. They were met by a fleet of medical ships and civilian transports that had gathered to wait for them, and when the first battered destroyer came through the jump point, a cheer went up across every communication channel in the solar system. But the cheer faded quickly when the second ship came through, and the third, and the fourth, and then no more came for a long time, and people began to count, and the number they reached was not the number they had hoped for. 8,214. That was the final count. 8,214 men and women who had flown to the Chiron expanse and did not fly back. Their names were entered into the record, one by one, carefully, by teams of officers whose only job for those first few days was to make sure every name was spelled correctly. Every name mattered. Every name was a life. Admiral Tejo read the list in his quarters aboard the Baekdu. It took him 4 hours. He read every name, slowly, the way a man reads a prayer. When he was finished, he folded the list, 23 pages of paper, because he had insisted on printing it, and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. There were other lists in that drawer from other battles earlier in the war. He did not take those out. He simply added the new one to the pile and closed the drawer. Then he sat in his chair and stared at the wall for a very long time. He did not cry. He had forgotten how. The galaxy changed faster than anyone expected. Without the radiance, the Veil Communion had no center, no source of power, no god to fight for. The 14 species that had been held together by fear and worship for thousands of years simply fell apart. Some of them sent messages to Earth within days of the battle. Messages of surrender, messages of peace, messages that said in a dozen different alien languages some version of the same thing. We were slaves too. 3 of the communion species turned on each other almost immediately. Old hatreds, buried for centuries under the weight of forced devotion, erupted into civil wars that spread across their home systems. 2 species simply shut down. Their entire civilizations, built around the ritual of feeding energy to their god, had no purpose anymore. They stopped communicating. Their ships went silent. Their worlds went dark. Others reached out to humanity, carefully, cautiously, the way a person reaches toward a fire to see if it is warm or if it burns. Humanity had just killed the most powerful being in the known galaxy. That made humanity either a savior or a threat, depending on who was looking. Sujin managed the intelligence flood from her station on Chanmasan. Messages poured in from species that had nothing to do with the communion, civilizations from distant parts of the galaxy that had heard what happened and wanted to make contact. Some were diplomatic, some were scientific, some were barely disguised in their fear. One message from a species that called itself the Delway was only 3 words long. What are you? Sujin stared at that message for a while, before filing it. Hana woke up in a medical bay on Earth, 17 days after the battle. The doctors told her she had been in a coma. They told her the damage to her brain was permanent. The psychic connection the radiance had forced into her mind had left scars that would never fully heal. She would hear echoes for the rest of her life, they said. Fragments of electromagnetic noise that sounded like whispers at the edge of hearing. The ghost of a dead god, murmuring in frequencies only she could perceive. She accepted this with a calmness that surprised the doctors. She had known the cost when she stepped onto the Bektu. She had paid it willingly. Yuna came to visit her on the 3rd day after she woke up. The physicist looked better than the last time Hana had seen her. She had slept, finally, and the dark circles under her eyes had faded. But there was something else in her expression, something heavy and unsettled, like a question she could not stop asking herself. I found something, Yuna said, sitting beside Hana's bed. In the Bektu's sensor logs, the Radiance's final electromagnetic emission, right before it died. I ran it through every translation algorithm we have. And, Yuna was quiet for a moment. It resolved into something more like the shape of a concept, pushed outward in one last burst. If I had to translate it, the closest thing would be a question. What question? Yuna looked at her hands. Why? The room was silent. Hana stared at the ceiling. The echoes in her mind, the faint whispers that never quite went away, seemed to grow a little louder for a moment, then faded back to their usual murmur. In its last moment, Hana said slowly, it wasn't angry. I felt that during the battle, right before I passed out. It was confused. It didn't understand how something so small could hurt something so vast. It had existed for 100,000 years. It had crushed entire civilizations, and then these tiny, short-lived creatures came along and ended it in 90 seconds. It couldn't make sense of it. Yuna nodded. She did not tell Hana that she had decided not to publish the finding. Some things, she felt, were better left in the silence between stars. Do-hyun went home to Incheon after the war. He had spent the last year inside a hollowed-out asteroid, building a weapon that defied reason. And he wanted to see the ocean. He stood on the waterfront for an hour, watching the waves, before a journalist found him. The journalist asked him what Project Sindanhua had proved. Do-hyun thought about it for a long time. He thought about the tungsten spear, 10 kilometers of cold metal. He thought about the 26 accelerator platforms, each one burning out in a flash of magnetic fury. He thought about the engineers who had welded and bolted and calculated for months in the belly of a dark asteroid, building something impossible because the alternative was extinction. It proved that there's no such thing as a god that can't be touched, he said. We just needed a long enough arm. It would become one of the most quoted lines of the war. On a clear day in October, 6 months after the Battle of Chiron, a memorial wall was unveiled on Earth. It stood in a park in Seoul, a long curve of dark stone stretching nearly 200 meters, and on its surface were carved the names of every person who had died in the war. From the 7 million on New Busan, to the 8,000 at Chiron, to the hundreds of thousands on the other colony worlds that had burned before humanity struck back. The wall was not large enough for all the names. It would need to be expanded 3 times in the following year. Taeho stood before the wall in his dress uniform. He was alone. He had asked for no ceremony, no cameras, no speeches. The names were enough. He carried something in his hand. A small data chip, sealed in a clear case. It contained a letter, recovered from the black box of the Iron Vow after the wreckage was found, drifting near the Chiron expanse. The letter was written by a young officer named Wonjin, addressed to his mother. It had been sent in the last seconds before the Iron Vow's final charge. But the communication systems were already failing by then, and the message had not gone through. It was found later, stored in the ship's backup memory, surrounded by the names of dead men. Taeho had read the letter once. It was simple. Wonjin told his mother that the food on the ship was getting better. He told her that the captain was a good man. He told her not to worry. He told her he was proud to be where he was. He did not tell her he was about to die. He probably knew. He chose to write about the food instead. Taeho knelt and placed the data chip in a sealed case at the base of the wall, among the flowers and photographs and small personal items that people had been leaving there since the wall was built. He stood, stepped back, and saluted. He held the salute for a long time, longer than regulation required, because regulation had nothing to do with it. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps quiet on the stone path, the names of the dead stretching out behind him in the afternoon light. The galaxy had worshipped the radiance for 100,000 years. Humanity ended it in 90 seconds, with 10 kilometers of tungsten and a stubborn refusal to kneel. History would remember the spear. Poems would be written about the battle. Politicians would give speeches about human courage and the indomitable spirit of the species. But the soldiers who carried the spear, the ones who flew into the light and did not come back, they would remember something different. They would remember the silence after. The long, deep, holy silence that filled the place where a god used to be. A silence that tasted like grief, and smelled like victory, and felt, if you held very still, like the first breath of a universe finally set free.